Namaste, welcome. I'm Crist of the Jaguar Path, School of Yoga and Shamanism. Our mission is to teach yoga and shamanism as ways to awaken the spirit, to clear the mind, and to allow for the body to be able to engage fully in everyday life. With me today I have a very special guest. Stephan Rechtschaffen is the co-founder of Omega Institute, the founder of Blue Spirit Retreat Center here in Costa Rica, and also a physician who has created a beautiful longevity center here in Blue Spirit. So welcome, Stephan.
Great to be here with you. Great to have you here with me.
Yeah.
This is where I live.
It is a pleasure to be here, to have become neighbors and to be living here.
It's great to have you.
I have, since my original venture to find healing from cancer and working with the shamans, for the last 17 years now, I've been really diving into longevity, to understand what longevity is, not only for a longer life, but also for a more present life at every present moment. And I know you've been bringing teachers from around the world for more than 3 decades. And
4 now.
4 decades now. So what is your take on longevity? What are you feeling now, and where are you at now with your projects?
Well, the issue of longevity is, for me, fascinating because primarily it's about well-being. It's not just about, and we live here in one of the blue zones, and where people tend to live more than 100 years old. And for those who tend to live longer, the real critical issue isn't just the number of years, but how well are we living. So when I'm looking at that, it's about how does one really age well. Now, I since living here in Costa Rica, because it's, for me, the greenest country in the Western Hemisphere, the most focused on the natural environment, longevity to me tends to be, especially where I came from in the United States, a focus on, I don't want to die, how can I live longer? Mm-hmm. And that's not really that interesting to me, because ultimately we're all going to die. I don't care how good your longevity practices are. So what I became more fascinated in is really the larger ecosystem, the we instead of the me. And in that regard, when one looks out at nature, one finds incredible stories of longevity way beyond us. I mean, there are trees that live to be 10,000 years old. If we live to 100, that's great. Now, these trees are living 100 times that. So there's some secrets out there that we can really learn from. And I think that my major focus now is how do we maintain the vitality, maintain the connectivity with nature that allows us to live in real harmony with all that's around us. And that to me is well-being. And the well-being is not just about me, it's not just the I that's well-being. It's well-being in the connection of community, it's well-being in the connection of everything that's around us. So here, that's been part of my study and my understanding. And I'll just go into one thing which I think is really critical in understanding longevity, is that I look at it as there's the first growth phase. So for instance, until you're about 30 years old, maybe you grow to be 6 foot tall, or 5.5. But I can tell you by age 60, you're not 12 foot tall. So there's a certain point where we grow, and then the rest of life is about rest and repair. And I think our spiritual ancestors really understood that. They really understood. That's why in India, at a certain age, you went and you just did inner practice. One was not trying to any longer grow and ascend the mountains still. So in life, the phase of growth is important. And then it's almost like shooting a rocket into space. This is the growth phase. But then when it starts to go around in orbit, very little energy needs to be used. It's really quite relaxed. So what I'm saying with that is, it takes a lot of energy to get to that growth. A lot of what we're eating, but what I see happening around the world is that people are eating as though they're still growing.
That's a good
There's
one.
a problem with that.
That's a good one.
It's called obesity. we have in Western culture, in Western civilization, we see that obesity is one of the major problems. We're moving to the point where 50% of the population will be termed obese within a few years.
Wow.
So what's happening is we're acting as though we're growing. But people aren't exercising as much, they're not eating as well, they're not really coming into their age. We are obsessed in Western culture, especially having grown up in America, where the focus becomes trying to stay young. And so I don't want to stay young. I want to come, the wisdom cultures of the world, in India where one of our board members and longtime friend Ramdas, who passed this year, I remember him saying that he went to India and he had returned after being away for a while, and people he knew there, when they saw him, they said, "You look so much older." And he took that as initially like, "Oh, what's going on?" But there, that's considered a sign of reverence, of respect, because with age, hopefully we get wise.
So you look like you've grown wiser.
Exactly,
At the same time.
As opposed to I have more information in my head. So one of the problems with our world right now is we don't see much wisdom. And that's why you're involved in the teaching you are. That's what the various ancestors, I think the great diaspora happening in our world right now is the information that's coming out of Tibet, despite the fact that the Chinese came into Tibet. We know that this wisdom is now spreading out into the world, just as though we've gone into the rainforest. At the moment we have the pandemic coming out of it by releasing things, but the other thing that's coming out of it is the wisdom of, when you talk about the Jaguar Path, when you talk about the wisdom that comes out of the indigenous tribes.
Nature itself. Nature,
and also all of the shamans who have taught what they've taught. So these are times when the messages of the shamans, when the messages of the Tibetans, which are deep spiritual cultures, that's what's so lacking, missing in our society.
Absolutely, and my take on it is the comforts of the modern world and different safety things that have happened because of evolution or the Industrial Revolution are all great, but it seems like we've lost the teachings and that connection. And you originally started saying by looking at longevity from learning from the trees. And I really like that because it's really coming back to understanding that there's consciousness, more consciousness, not only in the human beings, but absolutely in all animals and absolutely in all trees and plants and spirits, etc. And that's what the Keros talk about, how to come back to that relationship with Earth itself, with the animals and the plant world.
In the plant world, I would recommend to anybody to read the book, The Overstory. It's a long book, but it just really gets your understanding on a deeper level of the trees. And what I love about it is that, for instance, I was always wondering why when people did archaeological digs, they would dig into, you had to find things deep in the earth, okay? So I used to wonder about that. And then I was thinking, when a tree grows, where does it get all of the material for growing as tall as it grows? Where does it get it?
It goes down.
No. Actually, it gets it from the air. The tree takes the carbon in the air, and that's what it does with taking the carbon, and it turns it into tree. The carbon dioxide is transformed into the growing of the tree. So when the tree, that's why there's more stuff on the planet now, of which things get buried by the fact that when the trees come down and growth comes down, right? So it's all come from the air. So there's that transformation that takes place. Now the trees give out the oxygen. And the oxygen is the exchange. Now, we exist as animals and as humans only by our capacity to utilize oxygen. And this is the most critical thing in terms of longevity. The whole game is about oxygen. So we are so dependent on the oxygen level that's out there for us. And when you look at that, understand the following. When there were single cell organisms, where they quickly went, we're talking a billion years ago, when it started multicellular, okay? Multicellular happened by larger organism engulfing a smaller one. And one of the ones that got engulfed is called the mitochondria. Mm-hmm. In your body, there's 500 to 4,000 mitochondria in every cell. So we have 30 trillion cells, it's a lot of zeros, in our body, of which there are 500 to 4,000 mitochondria. So we're talking about quadrillions. So every time I do this, there are thousands, millions of mitochondria giving their energy. What they are doing, because I'll often ask people, we all breathe oxygen. You can get by without food for quite a while. You can get by without water for quite a while. How long can you get by without breathing before the body drops?
Not
it's a very short time.
Mm-hmm.
A few minutes? Okay.
Maybe, yeah.
Right. Where does the oxygen go? What's it doing? And I'll ask people, let's see. It goes into the blood. Yeah. And? Let's go a little more.
And then?
And then. So it goes into the blood, through the lungs, it goes into the blood, and then ultimately it gets into the cell. Now, 99% of your oxygen for the brain, for the heart, for your muscles, for your everything is going to the mitochondria. The mitochondria are the whole game. They're like the ATM for your body. Give me oxygen, I'll give you ATP. ATP is the coin of the realm. ATP is where you get your energy. It's sort of like when you have a water wheel. Water comes and it spins the wheel and it gives energy that can produce electricity.
Would you call that chi? Prana?
Absolutely.
Itself? So ATP equals?
I don't know if we'll say it equals, but in other words, your chi is no question. Your chi is no question that it's coming out of that. And your capacity to maintain chi and to raise chi and so on is going to be related to that. Our ability to think. All of the energy systems in the body are going to ultimately be related to your capacity to utilize oxygen. So our ability to relax, the Tibetans will call it, in terms of the subtle body, the raising of lung, your ability to relax the energy down. Our ability to exercise and learn how to be more aerobic. One of the problems with aging is that we tend to become more anaerobic. We produce, one of the big problems is, for instance, sugar. So a critical feature is, now sugar can be helpful in our early stages, but at a certain point you've got to get rid of the sugar. If you don't get rid of the sugar, if you don't do intermittent fasting, if you don't do aerobic exercising, you start to go anaerobic. We hear about people as they age with chronic disease, and chronic disease is the whole game. For instance, even in the COVID situation right now, we talk about people as they get older being more susceptible to COVID. Well, I believe the reason they're more susceptible to getting COVID is because they have more chronic disease. You don't have chronic disease when you're 40. You don't have chronic disease when you're 30 and so on. Some people can get that, some weakness in the body, but once you start to get 60, 70, 80, you see a lot more chronic disease one way or another. They're all diseases of oxygen. They're all diseases of utilization.
Lack of oxygen.
Exactly. Lack of oxygen.
Right.
And lack of the body's capacity to utilize the oxygen. Because if you're on a sugar diet, what's happening is the body produces oxygen by burning fat. So we hear about fatty liver and people who start to have the disease of fatty liver. Is it because they're eating too much fat? No. It's because they're eating too much sugar. And the body can really burn sugar. But what happens is when it's burning sugar, it's not burning fat.
Not burning fat.
So the fat gets stored away. And so you people who have obesity, it's not because they're eating too much fat, it's because they're eating too much sugar. And the body starts to burn sugar. The problem with burning sugar is it's not the efficient way to go. And so the body learns bad habits, gets lazy in what it does. And as a result, that's what we're seeing in chronic disease and aging. So to me, all of the focus on longevity is learning from the way nature is. I'll give another example of that. Every species at some point goes through a period of famine. Okay. In order for a species to continue, it has to get through the famine. During times of famine, women, females of a particular species will stop procreating. You see, aging is sort of built in with the idea that the new will come, as represented by the children in the next line. You see this with trees. A tree will drop to the ground and decay so that it can feed the new members of its society to rise up again. So that's often programmed in. That's the way nature does its thing. Now in a time of famine, what actually happens is the body stops procreating because it needs to hold in all the energy to get through the famine. When we stop eating, we stop aging. So what happened now?
So fasting essentially equals longevity or
intermittent fasting. If you fast too long,
then you
it's
start
not going to work.
Okay.
Then it starts deteriorating because you're not getting anything the body.
You're not
needs.
getting the energy. You're not getting the nourishment itself.
Yeah. So the intermittent fasting is important. All of these, it's called press push. You need to have these kinds of cycles where it's like exercising. I tend to think that you are born with a certain number of heartbeats. Use them wisely. Now what I mean by that, and people say, well, why exercise? My heart rate goes up. But if you exercise, your overall heart rate starts to go down. So people in really good condition, they're going to be doing a heart rate of 40, 50, something in that range. So 70 is okay, but you can do better. And that's what I look at, is how do we optimize our well-being and then simply be in orbit, not overstress the system. Find the way to be in right balance. And right balance is it's so subtle. It really involves a subtle body. And right balance, we're not in right balance with the earth. We're not in right balance with each other. The degree of animosity going on in our societies right now is really disturbing because it's not, between the right and the left, whatever country you look at, there's no longer any form of dialogue. There's just a kind of, and this energy that's happening.
Fire.
Yeah, this energy is just
inflammation.
burning. That's right.
Inflammation showing up.
Yeah. So I think that well-being is something that I always want to have be part of the longevity. It's not about, am I going to live forever? No. It's really about, are we going to live well? And my concern is, as I feel my aging body, it is aging. And at the same time that it's aging, my quest is not the fountain of youth, eternal life. Actually, it's about the deepening of life and living well. And if we can do that, it's not living well just for ourselves, it's living well for everyone else. And that to me is why, honestly, I moved down here to Costa Rica. It's why I do Blue Spirit here. It's an opportunity for people to come here and experience what living well can be. We don't have enough.
Absolutely.
That's when I started Omega way back over 40 years ago. It was about people who were so stressed in society. When I wrote my book, this is now, I think, 25 years ago almost, yeah. My book, Time Shifting, it was about how everybody's noticing time getting faster and faster, right? No one doesn't notice that time is faster. As one person spoke about, he said, you can tell the rhythm of any society by listening to its music. We don't live in a time of Gregorian chant or Bach and Beethoven. We lived at and I'm amazed 25 years ago, since writing that, how much time has sped up since then as we're on the internet and we're all addicted to these machines. And when we put it down and look to, well, what should we do? We don't go, oh, I think I'll sit back and read a book.
And, you know, the funny thing is that what you're making me think is that as it's going faster, it doesn't seem like we have more of it. It seems like we're constantly running out of it.
That's right.
And we're shifting. There's no time to sit for meditation. There's no time to sit and eat well and properly and digest.
The reason I titled my book Time Shifting was to give people the sense it's sort of like riding a 10-speed bicycle. So if you're riding a 10-speed bicycle, when you're going up a hill or down a hill or around curves, you shift your gear to be in the right rhythm. Okay? If you are doing it in the wrong rhythm, you're spending a lot of energy and getting nowhere. And so in our modern world, there's times to go fast. And I'm effective when I go fast. The trouble is I get addicted to fast. And so unless one's finding practices that allow one to slow down, listening to some beautiful piece of music, sitting doing meditation, but we're like this, and then we come and we meet our spouse or a friend and we want to have a conversation, and then they're in this state and we're in this state. And when rhythms are not aligned, we get into arguments really quickly. So it's like when you go to speak to somebody of a different language. You start talking to them, and then you don't like.
You have too much energy.
That's right. And then you start to say, and then you start to talk louder. Like, do you understand what I'm saying? No, they don't. So it's somewhat like that. When we're in the same rhythm, you see people start to nod their head in the same rhythm. You see people dance. You start to like, hey. And so the practice, to me, of being in nature. You know, here's this tree, 10,000 years old. It hasn't moved from there. I mean, it's swayed its branches and all of this, but it's pretty content. And I would love to start to feel that level of contentment. The more one can find that in one's life, instead of just like we're rushing to get where.
And what this is making me think is that if I'm in that level of agitation and I'm always rushing, either through my food or through work or where I'm going on top of this, I take it that this has an immediate effect on my mitochondriac.
Absolutely.
Right? And how they're functioning, right?
That's when I mentioned the Tibetan aspect of subtle body or lung, which is that many of us are not doing anything, but internally this is going on. And that internal going on is robbing us of our health. And it isn't taken seriously enough in Western society or Western medicine.
It's not noticed that That's internal right. stress is perhaps where all disease is born.
Right. It's like being it's where the engine is running, but you're not in gear. Nothing's happening. You can look at somebody, I'm so something's going on, I don't know what it is.
We get to see that a lot.
And so to me, that's where doing different forms of internalized practice helps. So whether one's practicing mindfulness, different forms of meditation, being exposed to the varying great traditions, of which you're representing a great tradition, that start to bring forth ways that people can really, in their bodies, embody this ancestral
wisdom and knowing of being. That is perfect. And yeah, I feel that, and I feel the Jaguar Path bringing forth the work of the Keros and the shamans in Peru are essentially, as the conquistadors arrived, the Keros took up for the mountains. And not only did they survive, but they held this deep knowledge of how to be like that tree, of how to eat and give space for digestion, and how to exercise, from walking and being to different forms of yoga. May that be Tai Chi, yoga itself.
There's so many different forms, and a lot of people get stuck on one form or another, and to recognize where these are all deeply connected.
Absolutely.
Again, and I look to the trees for this, because you realize that with the trees, and the great movie that was just done, Fantastic Fungi, we often talk about plant, animal, or mineral. The reality is the mold, the fungus, that's been there as the base of everything. And so underneath the trees, we see the top there. But for instance, the aspen trees, their real body is under the ground. All of the aspen trees you see are all connected to one huge underneath connectivity that in some ways, like for instance, if a tree is attacked by certain kinds of microbes, it sends out messages to the other trees so it can produce the
antibody for
that's right.
the immune system.
Yeah, so this is where that connectivity is just so important in terms of what we see. The trees respond, and that's something we need to learn. And again, the trees just are not moving. An experience I had a number of years ago, I was on with my dear friend Roshi Joan Halifax, who would every year do a nomad clinic, and has done it for many years. I went up with her and a group of people high up into the northern Nepal near the Tibetan border, and going visiting villages as she does every year, and giving medical care. And we would walk many miles every day, and to get from one village to another, up and down the mountains. And up high in a mountain, we visited a cave that had been known for Padmasambhava. We're talking 1,000 years ago, sitting in this cave. What most struck me was that Padmasambhava, out of whom so much of Tibetan teachings have come, and his lineage, and as we know it today, I'm sitting in this cave and I'm looking out at the horizon of the mountains around, and I realize this is the same view that he saw 1,000 years ago.
Wow.
This was no different in experience, and here was somebody who simply just sat in the cave and changed the world. And so you realize that it's not by the doing nature that we necessarily change what's important. It's by the being nature. And so we have too much doing and not enough. We become human doings instead of human beings in that way. So the question for each of us to internalize more is, how do we start to get that to change? Since I'm mentioning that story, one other is that when I was very early in my medical practice, before my medical practice, I was at the end of medical school, I got to take to work abroad, and I chose to go to India, and I worked in a hospital up in the first range of the Himalayas, and it was back in the early 70s, and I was visiting a very beautiful holy spot in town, and I came across this man, probably in his 70s or even 80s, spoke beautiful English, and was just tending his garden, very simply dressed. And I went to him, and I was just really moved, just his presence. And he said, yes, I was a professor at one of the universities, and now I've just come here, and I tend my garden, and then the rest of the day I sit in meditation. And he said, he looked at me, and he said, I love to meditate. And he said that, and it pierced through me in such a way that I just as I say that, I remember the image of it, because I had been doing Zen meditation at the time. But to say I was doing Zen meditation, I was doing Zen meditation. I'm going to quiet my mind. I'm going to count my breath till my mind is quiet. And there was nothing in my meditation that loved meditating.
It was a straight practice rather
this is
than
what I'm
love.
doing. And it struck me so deeply, like this is not something one's efforting at. There's a lot of efforting that goes into spiritual practice as opposed to the allowing oneself to recognize this is the essence and truth of our being. And so it's finding that place where actually one comes into a place of deeper relaxation, not the effort that so we in the West, we tend to effort to do anything, to make more money, to become famous, to do this, to achieve that, and the efforting never. So I see a lot of people in the West who take on, now I'm going to become a meditator, now I'm going to become enlightened, now I'm going to, and so it's the next quest. And the truth is, we need less questing.
Everything is here already.
Yeah, and just allowing life to unfold itself in the more natural way that these trees aren't questing around us. They understand being.
And I love what you said about the aspen trees, that they're all interconnected, and one will send information to the other, and it feels very much like that. If one gets that information, bringing the ancient information of being, and we all find that synchronicity of frequency.
Yeah, exactly.
Then we can pass the teachings to one another, just like the trees are doing each other.
Yeah, that's what, when the word a meme, it's one of the ways that human society has evolved. Meme is sharing an idea. So for instance, if I give you $1, you have $1 more, I have $1 less.
Mm-hmm.
But when something becomes shared in terms of deep knowledge, you have it and I have it, and then we grow together. And so what we're looking for, too much of our society these days in modern Western society is, I want more, but you're going to have less.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Because I
definitely
want
can
more,
see that
I
happening.
need more. As opposed to the we starts to flourish in a way where we are evolving together. We're in this together. And how do we honor that? That's really what we're looking
That is beautiful. Thank you, Stephan.
for. Oh, my
Thank you
pleasure.
for the work you do in the world, for setting up these places.
Uh-huh. But it's great to have you here.
An
I
honor,
love
yeah,
it.
an honor. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
I will.
Really, really honored to have you here and be here with you.
Yes, great
for you to have us.
Okay, good.
Awesome. Namaste. Namaste.
Thank you all.